Welcome to the shop. I'm Eric Meyer, and today I'm going to show you how I made this little block plane out of some tigerwood. So I'm starting with a piece of Goncalo Alves, aka tigerwood. Not entirely sure I got all that pronounced correctly. At any rate, this has been milled once, and I have a video on that, and I'll leave a description. I'll leave a link down in the description. And there are a few cracks I need to work around, but there should be more than enough here for a block plane. So, and additionally, I have a jump start on the sole. I milled that one in the previous video where I made the coffin miter planes out of some canary wood. So for some inspiration, I found this photo of an antique French miter plane that I really like the look of, and that plane had two mortises, one for the blade and then one for the shavings, and that's something I wanted to do on this plane. And so to start things off, I'm going to cut up this billet, and essentially I'm cutting it in half. It was originally about 12 to 13 inches long when I first milled it, and to get around those cracks, I ended up cutting it down to about 5 inches. So then it was over to the table saw to square it up and then to get it cut to width. And for the width, I'm going to use the sole to set the width, set the distance between the fence and the blade, and then I'm going to back it off just a touch, maybe a 1/16, just so the wooden body is going to be a little bit oversized of the sole. That just gives me some wiggle room when I go to install the sole later. And so the next step here is going to be the layout. So this plane is going to have a low cutting angle, and it'll be bedded with the blade beveled down. And so I'm going to go ahead and mill in the bed at 40 degrees. Now this wood has a Janka hardness of 2170, so it's very hard, and this was not something I wanted to try to mortise by hand. So the mill here was a big help in getting all of this roughed out. And so after the mill, it's time to actually do some handwork now. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the mouth and then bring in the chisel and the saw to kind of get that mouth opened up, and then start getting everything trued up. Now, you may have noticed that I cut one big mortise, and the plan was to have two mortises on the plane. And so to turn this into a double mortise plane, I'm going to go ahead and cut a wedge that I will then glue in. So it's sort of like combining a traditionally made hand plane with a Krenov style plane. So now this was a challenging bit of work holding. I only had this small little piece left, and I didn't want to put it in the mill, and that probably would have been the optimal tool for this job. However, the mill was specifically set up to cut that 40-degree bed angle, and I had about 8 planes that I was working on that I needed that setup for, so I didn't want to break it down just for this cut. So instead, I chose the sketchy option of double-sided tape and hope. And I did this in 2 passes. Everything is real tight in there, and I wanted to make sure that I had the placement of my hold down stick in the exact right spot, so it wasn't going to catch in the blade. But I was successful in that cut, and then a little bit of a sanding, basically just to get this dialed in so I can make sure it actually fits in that mortise nice and snug. So now let's jump back in time to when I first started milling these soles. So like I said earlier, this is something that I had shown at the start of the video, and I had made this sole for this plane when I was working on the canary wood coffin miter planes in a previous video. And so this is some precision ground steel that I started with, and I went ahead and cut the sole to length on the bandsaw, and then I squared it up on the little benchtop mill I have there, and then I put it in that 40-degree jig to rough in the mouth. And so, once that 40-degree jig got set up, I didn't take it out for any reason, because just ease of setup. I didn't want to keep spending my time trying to get that dialed in if I broke it down and then needed to put it back up. And so then after doing the rough milling, I came in with some files. I use a lot of chainsaw files for this just because they cut fast and they have safe edges on them already. And that allowed me to get in and square up the corners and kind of get things opened up a little bit so I can get my blade through. And then once all that was done, I can go ahead and drill for my screw holes. All right, now we can pick up to where we left off with the body. So I've gone ahead and I've clamped the sole to the body. It's in the position where I want it. So I'm going to use a transfer punch to mark the hole locations, and then I'm coming in with a brad point bit on the drill, and the tip on that brad point bit helps find those transfer punches, so it kind of keeps the drill bit from wandering. It really locks everything in. And then just as a sanity check, I reinstalled the sole, and I'm going to go through and drill everything. And that's just like to help me make sure that I didn't, get something in the wrong spot or move it when I did my transfer punches. And then I did a little test, and the mouth was just a little too small, so I needed to come in and open it up. So I was back to the files. And, I could have gone back to the mill to open the mouth up on the sole, but there's a chance that, I messed something up or the bit grabs or whatever. So files, it's the slower operation compared to the mill, but it's the one with less chances of error. And given the time I already have into this, I'm trying to minimize, the possibilities for catastrophic failure. And so with the mouth being wider in the sole, I also needed to open up the body a little bit to accept everything. And this was a little bit of a tricky operation. I was trying real hard. I didn't want to break out any of those wood fibers on the top side. And then the 1, 2, 3 block there just helps me to make sure that the sides of that mortise are square to the sole. And that's not entirely crucial for the operation of the plane, but that's what I wanted to do for this one. And then back to the float to kind of clean up all that stuff. So now it's time for the glue up. And this wood is oily by nature, and it can interfere with like PVA glues. And so the first step here, or let me say, it can interfere with glues in general. So the first step here is to clean everything with some kind of solvent to break up the oils that's on the surface of the wood, and that just lets the glue adhere a little more. So I'm using acetone. You could also use denatured alcohol or mineral spirits. So, and then while that was flashing off, I went ahead and waxed up a wedge, and I'm going to use that to help position the piece that's being installed, and then it's all getting glued in with some epoxy. And then the reason for waxing that wedge is to make sure that I don't accidentally glue that into the plane. And so I got the piece I'm gluing in close, and then I can get it seated with the wedge to drive it forward and get it exactly where I want it. And so here it is all glued in, and I left everything oversized, just makes it a little bit easier, and I can take it over to the bandsaw, and this blade is still dull. I did get it changed eventually. And then I have a toothing plane, excuse me, I have a toothing blade installed in this plane. So it's, so instead of having a flat straight blade all the way across, there's little teeth, I guess, and it helps prevent tear out. It's much slower, but it helps prevent tear out, which can be a problem for this. And now what I wanted to do on the back is I wanted to round the back over so it wasn't just a straight block of wood. So I am going to go ahead and rough that out on the bandsaw, and then again back to a toothing blade to get that cleaned up to my line. And at this point, I realized I forgot to include my maker's mark. And with the body sorted, I'm going to move back to working on the sole. The sole at this point is too long because I made it for an 8-inch plane, and I significantly cut this one down. So it's too long, so it needs to be trimmed up. And then I'm going to go ahead and shape the rear section of the sole and then the front section. I'm going to just go ahead and do that on the belt grinder here. Now it's ready to be installed. So this is going on with screws, but I'm going to go ahead and add just a little bit of epoxy first, just to make sure that it's nice and secure, kind of like a belt and suspenders situation. And then I didn't show it on camera, but one of the things I did was I wanted to clock all the screws, and if I wasn't able to get them clocked, clock just means they're all going, all the heads, the slots and all the heads are going in the same direction. And if I couldn't quite get them clocked, I'd get them close, and then I could come in with a countersink on a drill. I was just using a little egg beater drill to just sink them down just that little bit more. and then I could reinstall the screws, get them clocked. And I made sure to do that before the epoxy went on, so I knew it was going to work. And then over on the belt sander now, the benchtop belt sander. So this is just, I am getting the sides, because they were just a little oversized, flushed up to the sole, and trying to keep everything nice and square. And then now I'm coming in, I'm putting a chamfer on the front, and this was a last minute design decision. I didn't, at this point, I realized I had a little bit of chipping out that happened at the corner, and I thought I was going to be able to get it out when I went to do all the sanding, and it was just deeper than that, and I decided to go ahead and chamfer the front to get past that where it chipped out. And honestly, you know what? This was a happy accident, because I like the look of this a lot better. And there, so I was using a plain blade that I blunted the end. Yeah, here you can see it here. I'm using a plain blade with a blunt end on it. And if you ever heard of the blunt chisel technique, Bill Carter is the one I saw had done it. It essentially allows your chisel to be a scraper. So I went ahead and I had an extra plain blade that I wasn't real happy with how it looked, but it was functional. So I turned that into basically an oversized blunt chisel. And now I'm doing just a little bit of round over on the top edge. Work that out with a chisel and then a plane, and now I'm coming in. I want to make sure I want a softer edge on this one. So then coming in with the sanding block to blend all that out. And so here's a piece of canary wood I had. This was a body blank that it was a failed body blank from when I made the planes in the last video, but there's still some good wood here, and I'm going to go ahead and use that to make the wedge. And I'm missing some footage, so I had gone to the bandsaw to cut the taper and then trued it up with a hand plane. And then just a little bit of sanding to get that back rounded out. And now at this point, I have all of my components. I got a blade, and the wedge, and the body, so I can go ahead and start making sure the bottom of that sole is nice and flat. And after that's done, turn my attention to the blade just to make it look pretty. Get the bevel ready to be sharpened, and then also get the back flat. And then I'll also refine that. So after the grinder here, I'll go through and refine those on some stones, just to make sure everything is nice and dialed in. And now it's time to do all of the first test cuts, and it's looking pretty good, but now we need to check the performance. And honestly, right now the performance could be better. The shavings are getting jammed up inside that exit mortise, so I'm going to go ahead and open that up a little bit. And this was something I assumed I was going to have to do, and it was easier to leave everything tight and then open it up as needed. And that definitely helped. The shavings can exit a little bit easier now, but this was one I bounced back and forth a little bit, and so I'm going to open it up a little bit more. And again, I'm using the 1, 2, 3 block there just to help me keep my chisel cuts nice and square. And then once I had it to where I was happy with it, I could come in with a float and just clean all that stuff up, make sure it looks pretty. And then I needed to, I found in testing I needed to open the mouth up some more. So again, back to the files, and it wasn't much. It was just a thou or two, and now everything's working a lot better. And I'm testing it here on. So this is red oak I've been using. I'm testing it on the end grain there. I want to make sure that blade can it can cut without chipping or deforming too quickly. And then now testing it on the long grain, taking some full width long grain shavings. And after, I was satisfied with it. And so now we're in the finishing stages. So I went ahead and cold blued the blade. It's something I like to do. I like the look. Plus it adds just a little bit of rust resistance. And then for the wedge here, I went ahead and stained it with some India ink. That's something I did on the canary wood planes I made in the last video. I really like the look, so I wanted to carry it over to this. And then I'm going to give this some oil just to help bring out the colors. And I'll oil it a few times over the course of a week. And so this is the finished plane. I'm real happy with it. And this one ended up being one of the auction items for Handtool Haven that was held this year in Butler, Pennsylvania. I'll leave a link in the description for Handtool Haven, as well as the organization that is putting it on, Plain Wellness. And you should check them out. They're doing a lot of great work. So thank you so much for tuning in and following along with what I'm making. I truly appreciate your viewership, and I'll see you on the next one.